HOA President Karen poured concrete into Jacob's legal well without warning, trying to erase his independence under the guise of aesthetic rules. Armed with arrogance and HOA funds, she thought no one would question her authority. But Jacob, a retired hydrologist, knew exactly who to call, and the EPA didn't take contamination lightly. Just wait until you hear how the truth surfaced, the fines landed, and justice flowed deeper than anyone expected. Jacob Miller had never been the type to cause trouble. A retired hydrologist with a calm voice and a habit of measuring rainfall in a leather-bound notebook, he'd moved to Pinewood Glen HOA for one reason: peace. After decades working for the state's water department, patching failing infrastructure and arguing policy with bureaucrats who barely understood groundwater flow, Jacob had wanted one final project all his own. So he found a modest home on a half-acre lot with a forgotten wellhead nestled behind an overgrown hedge. Most folks ignored it, just another relic, but to Jacob, it was a challenge. Over the course of 6 patient months, he tested the water, rebuilt the pump by hand, replaced the sealant, and eventually brought the old well back to life. It wasn't much to look at, just a metal cap, a small utility box, and a stone path leading to a spigot. But it worked. It kept his vegetable garden green through dry seasons and saved him from relying on the HOA's notoriously overpriced municipal hookup. For Jacob, it was more than just water. It was a return to something real. Then came the morning everything changed. It was just after 7 a.m. when the low rumble of engines woke him. At first, Jacob thought it might be city crews repairing a pipe, common around here after heavy wind. But then he heard men shouting, doors slamming, a beep of a reversing truck. Curious, he stepped onto the porch in his robe and slippers and froze. 3 men in reflective vests were climbing into a flatbed truck as a cement mixer pulled away. The ground near his well was torn, the hedges trampled. The air smelled like limestone and wet gravel. And right where the well had been, where his hand-laid bricks and spigot used to sit, there was now a flat slab of smoking concrete, slick and gray in the morning sun. An orange cone had been placed nearby, topped with a flimsy cardboard sign. The handwriting was barely legible, but the message was unmistakable. Non-compliant structure removed per HOA directive. Jacob stepped forward in disbelief, walking slowly toward the site as if approaching an open wound. The grass was splattered with mix residue. His rain sensor box was cracked in half. The well itself, sealed, not capped, not covered, buried. He felt the first pangs of something he hadn't felt since his days in the field: helplessness. There had been no warnings, no notices, no phone calls, no orange tags or formal citations. Just silence. And then this. Hands trembling slightly, Jacob pulled out his phone and took pictures. 1, 2, 3. He zoomed in on the sign, then on the license plate of the departing truck. But what he really wanted, what burned behind his steady exterior, was a reason. The well sat on his property, not common land, not under HOA management, and the well permit was active, on file with the county, with usage reported annually. It had been legal, safe, and fully inspected, and now it was gone. He stood there for a long moment, shoes sinking into the damp grass, eyes locked on the smooth slab of unwanted cement. Around him, the neighborhood was still, birds chirping, sprinklers ticking on down the street, someone walking a dog unaware of the violation that had just occurred. But Jacob was not still. Something in him had shifted. Beneath the shock, something colder had started to settle. Not rage, not yet, but the early shape of it. Not a drop of concrete had touched Karen Whitford's pristine lawn across the street, but he had a feeling her fingerprints were all over this. If Jacob had any doubts about who orchestrated the destruction of his well, they vanished the moment he walked across the street. Karen Whitford opened her front door with a polished smile that didn't reach her eyes. She was already dressed for the day, hair done, pressed slacks, HOA badge clipped to her blouse like a sheriff's star. Behind her, Jacob could see a pristine foyer decorated with beige walls and scented candles. The lawn behind her was emerald green, a stark contrast to the brittle yards of neighbors who couldn't afford the HOA's private irrigation fees. "Jacob," she said, her voice dripping with condescension, "I heard there was some confusion about your installation." He didn't yell. He didn't even raise his voice. "That well was on my land, registered, permitted. What gives you the authority to destroy it?" Karen tilted her head like she was speaking to a child. "The board voted to remove unsanctioned water systems. They're inconsistent with community standards. It's all in the bylaws, Jacob. You should really keep up." He didn't need a law degree to know something was off. He thanked her curtly and left, without slamming the door, though every muscle in his body told him to. That night, Jacob pulled up the official HOA meeting minutes. There was no vote. Not a single line about water access systems, aesthetics, or removals. What he found instead was a footnote about ongoing concerns regarding property uniformity, vague enough to mean anything, and specific enough to mean trouble when someone like Karen wanted it too. A day later, a letter arrived from the HOA attorney, James Rolston, a name Jacob recognized from neighborhood whispers. The letter accused him of tampering with neighborhood utilities and threatened escalating fines for non-compliance with HOA utility standards. Jacob sat at his kitchen table, letter in one hand, coffee cooling in the other. He read it 3 times. The words felt surreal. Tampering? With his own water? There was no public line on his property. The HOA didn't supply a drop to his land, but now they were trying to rewrite the facts, rewrite the boundaries. That's when the violation turned into something deeper. Not just destruction, not just overreach, erasure. Karen wasn't trying to fine him. She was trying to rewrite history, remove any evidence that he'd ever stood apart from their system. But Jacob wasn't the kind of man who folded easily. Not in the field, not in courtrooms, and certainly not in his own home. He packed a folder, got in his truck, and drove straight to the county records office. There, under flickering fluorescent lights, he dug through parcel maps, deed notes, and permitting archives until he had every document that proved 2 things beyond question. 1. His land was private. 2. His well was legal, and always had been. But Jacob didn't stop there. He remembered something he'd noticed after the concrete set, a faint chemical smell near the hedgerow runoff, one he hadn't detected before. His background in hydrology kicked in. Concrete, especially in excess, can leach alkaline residue, and if improperly poured, that residue can travel into groundwater, into nearby systems. He submitted a formal damage report to the State Environmental Protection Agency, citing potential aquifer contamination and illegal disposal of industrial material on private land. He attached photos, coordinates, water test logs from months prior. The complaint was clinical, precise, and targeted, because Jacob knew something Karen didn't. When you bury a well, it's not just a property dispute, it's an environmental crime. When the 2 white SUVs from the Environmental Protection Agency pulled into Pinewood Glen, they didn't come with sirens or fanfare, just clipboards, hard cases, and federal credentials. Their jackets read Water Contamination Division in small but bold blue letters. They didn't knock on doors. They walked straight to Jacob's property and began their inspection. Jacob greeted them calmly. He'd already marked the runoff path, prepared copies of his well permit, and flagged the exact concrete slab that once fed his irrigation line. He didn't need to embellish anything. The scene spoke for itself. Karen, however, was less composed. Within 15 minutes, she marched across the street in heels, holding a tumbler of iced tea like it was a gavel. Her voice rang out over the hedges. "I don't know who called you, but this is ridiculous," she shouted. "That man is running a hazardous operation back there. I told the board months ago. It's a waste of taxpayer money sending agents to deal with a fake farm." One of the agents looked up. "Ma'am, we're not with code enforcement," he said flatly. "We're here on a contamination report involving unauthorized materials introduced into a potable water system." Karen blinked. "A what?" But the agents were already walking the perimeter, taking soil samples, photographing flow lines, and placing small test strips into the runoff basin near the fence. They moved with quiet precision, the kind of focus that doesn't respond well to interruption. Jacob didn't say a word. He simply handed over his folder, time-stamped photos, motion-triggered wildlife cam footage showing the construction crew pouring the concrete, and a copy of the HOA bylaws showing no vote had ever been held. What the agents discovered over the next 48 hours was worse than anyone expected. The concrete Karen had ordered poured into Jacob's well hadn't just sealed a pipe. It had bled into the porous edge of the underground flow channel that stretched toward the east side of the neighborhood. Two nearby properties, both of which relied on shallow groundwater for supplemental use, were now at risk of elevated pH levels and mineral intrusion. Water samples showed traces of lime particulate migrating through the system. The EPA issued its preliminary report within the week. Unauthorized structural interference with a state-registered potable water source, resulting environmental impact, moderate, responsible party identified, civil liability pending. Karen was furious. She called an emergency HOA meeting that Thursday, attempting to paint the entire situation as a smear campaign against her leadership. But Jacob had already shared the report with the board and with the homeowners whose water had tested abnormal. Then came the blow she hadn't expected. The concrete company, when contacted for records, confirmed everything. Karen had hired them directly. No permit, no environmental clearance. The job was listed as community landscape maintenance. Paid in full using the HOA's shared account. Jacob didn't have to press charges. The state did it for him. The EPA fine exceeded $140,000. It was issued personally to Karen Whitford, with the HOA listed as a secondary party unless they took steps to distance themselves, which they did immediately. In a 6-1 vote, the board suspended Karen indefinitely and initiated a financial indemnification process to recover the misused funds. Her lone supporter resigned the next day. At the next public meeting, Karen stormed into the room demanding to speak, but the microphone was turned off. No one looked at her. The same residents she once lectured about mailbox heights and grass length now sat in silence, arms folded, eyes cold. Her voice cracked. "I built this neighborhood? How dare you?" But the board president's chair sat empty, and no one was listening anymore. 3 months later, the sun rose gently over Pinewood Glen, casting long golden lines across the neighborhood lawns. On the edge of Jacob Miller's backyard, a sleek new steel-capped wellhead shimmered with condensation in the morning light. It stood taller than the old one, deeper too, and beside it, a humming filtration unit worked in steady rhythm, purifying water at a level that rivaled most municipal systems. The entire reconstruction had been paid for through state-administered environmental damages, specifically the fine issued to Karen Whitford. The EPA had handled it directly. The funds were released quietly, with no press release, no formal apology. But Jacob didn't need either. The clean water flowing from the pump was apology enough. Karen's house, once the tallest and most polished on the block, now sat with the shutters drawn and a real estate sign in the yard. Her name had been removed from every committee. Liens, plural, had been filed by the state, the HOA, and even her own legal counsel. Word around the neighborhood was she'd moved in with her sister 2 counties over, pending the outcome of a personal bankruptcy case. The HOA, in the meantime, had entered repair mode. A letter, unsigned but clearly authored by the remaining board, appeared in Jacob's mailbox, offering reimbursement for his bottled water, irrigation losses, and distress caused by unauthorized actions. They also asked if he'd consider joining the new board. He declined. Jacob didn't want a seat at their table. He wasn't looking to manage anyone else's lawn height or garage color. He just wanted to tend his land, drink his water, and be left alone. And now, finally, he could. That afternoon, he pulled a wooden chair out under the shade tree near the well and sat beside the new system. The pump kicked on with a low mechanical sigh, and clear water spilled gently into the channel that fed his garden beds. Birds called from the oak branches above. Somewhere in the distance, a lawn mower buzzed. Life went on. Jacob didn't smile out of spite. He smiled because it was over, because he'd taken something broken, twice now, and restored it. Because the woman who tried to bury him in silence had only made his voice louder, his claims stronger, and his legacy deeper. Justice hadn't come fast, but when it came, it ran clean and it ran deep.